They say history doesn't give warnings, but sometimes it pauses, lets the world hold its breath, and then rewrites itself in real time. That was Geneva. That was the day a man the West once mocked for wearing a soldier's uniform. Made the most powerful room on earth go silent. The insult was supposed to humiliate him. Instead, it lit a fire, and the world is still feeling its heat. The scene opens inside a grand hall on the edge of Lake Geneva, marble shining, chandeliers scattering light like fractured diamonds. It was the International Economic Summit. The kind of event where every handshake costs millions and every sentence gets dissected by news anchors before the coffee cools. Delegates from every corner of the globe filled the seats, faces polished by power, smiles rehearsed to perfection. Outside, protesters shouted about climate justice and debt relief. Banners waved in the alpine wind like battle flags from different wars, some fighting for the planet, others for survival. Inside, tension hummed like static before a lightning strike, because everyone knew this wasn't just another meeting, this was a collision, old power versus new. The architecture of the 20th century meeting the anger of the 21st. The seating arrangement itself told a story. Northern nations clustered near the front, their nameplates gilded, their water bottles branded with corporate logos. African delegations scattered toward the back and sides, as if proximity to power had to be earned, not inherited. But positioning doesn't determine destiny. And what was about to unfold would prove that distance means nothing when your voice carries the weight of continents. When the doors opened for the U.S. delegation, the temperature in the room changed. Black SUVs rolled up like a motorcade from a movie. Tinted windows reflecting the Swiss mountains like mirrors of empire. Donald Trump stepped out. Every camera flash chasing him like he'd ordered them himself. He walked into the summit with that same American swagger, half confidence, half showmanship, surrounded by aides whispering strategies. But listening only to himself, he didn't nod. Didn't greet most of the African leaders. Just glanced toward their section, smirked, then checked his phone as if their presence was background noise in a conversation only he was having. It was disrespect disguised as dominance, and everyone felt it. Journalists scribbled notes. Photographers adjusted their lenses. Even the translators exchanged glances. Because they knew the language of contempt doesn't need words to be understood. At table 17 sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier turned president, a leader who'd fought rebellions, coups, and the weight of history itself. No golden pen, no expensive suit, just a plain uniform stitched with discipline, not privilege. The fabric worn but clean, the kind of simplicity that makes luxury look hollow. While others adjusted microphones and ties, straightened their notes and practiced their sound bites, Traoré simply waited, still as stone, watching. His hands rested flat on the table. No fidgeting, no performance. The calm of a man who'd seen gunfire and famine, who'd buried friends and raised flags, who understood that real battles aren't won with volume but with conviction. Behind him sat his small delegation, young ministers with fire in their eyes, advisors who'd traded cushy UN jobs for the dirt roads of revolution, a single photographer capturing not propaganda but proof. They'd come to Geneva not to beg, not to perform, but to bear witness, and if provoked, to respond. When Trump finally took the podium, the hall dimmed into attention. Spotlights converged, the kind of silence that feels expensive. He started predictably, talking about American strength, economic dominance, and leadership in the free world. The usual script. The familiar tune that had played for decades. America as savior, banker, teacher, and judge. Then came the pivot, sharp, calculated. "Let's be honest," he said, his eyes sweeping toward the African section like a spotlight searching for targets. "Some continents need supervision. History proves they can't manage themselves without chaos." The translators hesitated, their voices breaking as they searched for neutral words that didn't exist, for insults that old. Every syllable landed like shrapnel. Cameras zoomed in. You could see it, the dismissive hand wave, the smirk of a man certain no one would challenge him, the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences. Trump went on, his voice rising with false concern, accusing African nations of wasting aid, of corruption as if it were genetic, of needing guidance from those who understand how systems work. He spoke of infrastructure projects stalled by incompetence, never mentioning the foreign contracts that bled them dry. He mentioned conflict zones, ignoring the weapons deals that armed both sides. He referenced poverty, as if the mines that made his friends rich had nothing to do with villages that starved. The words weren't policy. They were colonial echoes dressed in a tie. The same paternalism that carved borders with rulers, that stole artifacts and called it preservation, that renamed cities and rewrote textbooks until entire generations forgot their own names. The hall froze. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of a continent holding itself back. Fists clenched under tables. Jaws tightened behind diplomatic masks. An Ethiopian economist stared at her notes, pen shaking. A Senegalese minister closed his eyes as if praying for patience. A South African diplomat whispered something sharp in Xhosa. Her aide squeezed her arm gently, a silent plea to wait. But not Traore. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. His silence wasn't weakness. It was the silence of a man who's been underestimated too many times and knows exactly how to turn insult into ammunition. He'd heard it all before. In French barracks, where African soldiers were called children in uniform, in conference rooms where his nation's resources were discussed as if Burkina Faso was absent from its own story, in meetings where maps of Africa appeared with no borders, just blank space labeled opportunity. This insult was nothing new. But this time the microphone was live, the cameras were rolling, and the world was watching. When Trump finished, the applause came half-hearted and confused, a mix of loyalty, fear, and disbelief. Some clapped because their governments told them to. Others from muscle memory, decades of going along to get along. Then came the silence, a silence so heavy it felt alive. The kind that precedes earthquakes. Every lens turned to Ibrahim Traoré. What would he do? Walk out in protest, giving Trump the headline he wanted? Fight back with anger, confirming every stereotype? Shatter diplomacy with a single word? The moderator cleared his throat nervously, ready to move on. To bury the moment under procedural language and coffee breaks. Instead, Traoré reached forward and pressed the microphone button. That tiny click cut through the air like a trigger pull. Trump's smirk faltered. His team leaned in, whispering warnings. Security stiffened, hands moving toward radios, because real power doesn't rush. It waits. Traore didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch until it became his, until every person in that hall understood that what came next would matter. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Trump's. Calm, piercing, the kind of gaze that doesn't just see a man, it measures his era, and then he spoke. "I stand before you," he began, his voice low but clear, carrying the weight of deserts crossed and battles won. Not as a man insulted, but as the voice of billions who were silenced. The words dropped into the hall like thunder rolling off the mountains outside. You question our capacity for leadership, yet it was African gold that built your palaces, African hands that raised your cities, African resources that powered your revolutions. He wasn't reading notes, he was reading history, and history had receipts. My grandfather fought for France, he said, his voice steady but sharp, defending a liberty he never lived to taste. He bled in trenches at Verdun for a flag that would never fly over his village. He was promised citizenship, dignity, a future. Instead, he returned home to find French corporations stripping his land of everything beneath it. His voice lowered, but somehow carried farther. My grandmother mined uranium for bombs that never protected her village. She carried rocks that glowed with poison, rocks that powered the lights of Paris while her children studied by candlelight. If they studied at all. You could hear it now. The shift in the room. Phones being set down. Note-taking stopping. This wasn't a speech anymore. It was testimony. You ask if we can govern ourselves, Traore continued, his hand gesturing toward the European section, while your museums overflow with what you stole from us. The British Museum holds more Ethiopian history than Addis Ababa. The Louvre displays Benin bronzes stolen during massacres. Your universities teach from scrolls taken from Timbuktu, a city that had universities when your capitals were still villages. A French delegate shifted uncomfortably. His aide pretended to check emails. While your corporations, Traore's voice rose slightly, profit from minerals buried beneath our feet. Coltan from Congo powers every phone in this room. Cobalt from Katanga runs your electric dreams. Gold from Ghana fills your reserves. Yet, the miners, the children in those pits, they will never own the devices they died to create. The camera found a delegate from Silicon Valley, his expression frozen between guilt and defiance. While your laboratories patent medicines drawn from our ancient knowledge, Hoodia from the Kalahari becomes your diet pill. Artemisia from our traditional healers cures malaria, but only after a European company claims to have discovered it. You could see European delegates looking down at their phones, the same devices built from African cobalt. Trump sat frozen. The man who dominated rooms for decades, suddenly silent, suddenly small. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. His jaw worked, but no words came. For once, American exceptionalism had no rebuttal. Traore continued, each word building like a drumbeat. But I did not come here to recite pain. Our ancestors already paid that debt in blood. I came to show you what happens when Africa remembers her name. He gestured toward the screens behind him. A technician hit a button. And then, reality flipped. On the massive monitors, satellite images appeared, Burkina Faso's farmlands glowing green where desert once ruled. His voice guided the visuals like a conductor. 18 months ago, we rejected genetically modified seeds designed to keep us dependent. We returned to our indigenous crops, millet, sorghum, fonio, grains that survived droughts for millennia before corporations told us they were primitive. The images shifted. Farmers in cooperatives, hands deep in rich soil, irrigation systems built with local materials, markets overflowing with produce that bore no corporate logo. And now, Traore said, we feed ourselves. The numbers flashed. Food independence, 87%. Exports, tripled. Foreign aid, 0. The room stirred. Murmurs rippled through the African section. Nods of recognition, quiet pride. For once, Africa wasn't a headline about famine. It was a case study in sovereignty. The slides changed again. Young engineers assembling solar panels under the Sahelian sun, designing smartphones stamped "Made in Burkina Faso," coding apps in Mooré and French and English. Factories, research labs, innovation hubs, dignity, made visible. This smartphone, Traoré held up a device, was designed in Ouagadougou, assembled in Bobo-Dioulasso, from raw material to finished product, all within our borders. We no longer ask permission to participate in the future. We build it. Delegates from India, Brazil, and Japan leaned forward. They saw the blueprint, the rebirth of a continent. This, Traoré said, his hand sweeping across the images, is what happens when we stop asking permission, when we stop waiting for capacity-building programs that build nothing but dependency. When we remember that we are the descendants of Timbuktu's scholars, great Zimbabwe's architects, Aksum's engineers, Kemet's astronomers. Even his military footage told a different story. African-made drones defending African borders. Surveillance systems designed by Burkinabe engineers. Cybersecurity operations run from Ouagadougou. No French troops, no American oversight, just independence. And the evidence kept coming. Trade deals with Malaysia, agricultural exchanges, tech partnerships, memorandums with Vietnam, textiles and education, partnerships with Cuba on healthcare, investment agreements with Gulf nations that bypassed Western banks entirely. The map on screen looked like a new world. And the West wasn't at the center anymore. Lines connected Ouagadougou to Jakarta, Hanoi, Havana, Doha. A web of South-South cooperation that needed neither Washington nor Brussels. By the time the final slide appeared, a chart showing Burkina Faso's GDP growth outpacing most of Europe, life expectancy rising, infant mortality dropping, literacy, rates climbing, the narrative of Africa needs help had collapsed completely. Trump looked away. His advisors frantically typed messages. His press secretary's face had gone pale. For the first time, he wasn't the story. Then, a sound broke the tension. Applause. Slow. Reluctant at first. Then spreading. A storm of clapping. Hands rolling across the hall like thunder across the savannah. First Indonesia stood. Then Brazil. Then Vietnam. One by one, the global South rose. Then Europe, hesitant, but moved. A Norwegian diplomat stood, tears in her eyes. A Spanish official followed. Even nations once tied to colonial powers joined in. Not out of politeness, but out of recognition. Something had changed. The applause grew louder, more insistent. Feet began to stamp, not in mockery, but in rhythm, in celebration. In that moment, the stage belonged to Africa. Trump's delegation sat motionless, their power evaporating with every rising cheer, every standing delegate, every camera that had turned away from them. His chief of staff tugged his sleeve, suggesting they leave, but Trump remained frozen, caught between pride and panic, unable to exit without admitting defeat, unable to respond without digging deeper. Then it happened, a moment no one planned, no one scripted. A young Ghanaian diplomat, Amara Osei, rose from her seat and walked straight toward the U.S. table. She couldn't have been older than 27. Her kente cloth shimmered under the chandeliers like flame. Gold and green and red, colors of independence and blood and hope. Security froze. Hands moved toward earpieces, uncertain. Even the cameras hesitated before locking on her determined stride. Her heels clicked against marble, each step deliberate, each movement carrying generations. She stopped in front of Trump. The room held its breath. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice clear and young and absolutely certain. "Thank you." Confusion rippled across his face. "Thank you," she repeated, "because your arrogance has done what 50 years of conferences could not. You reminded us who we are. You reminded us that respectability politics means nothing when respect is never given. You reminded us that we were never meant to have a seat at this table. We were meant to be the table itself, stripped for parts and sold for profit." The room erupted again, not applause this time, but something deeper: pride, vindication, recognition. She turned, gesturing to the standing nations. "You tried to divide us, Anglophone from Francophone, North from Sub-Saharan, developed from developing. But you have united us. You came to lecture and instead gave us clarity. You showed us that no matter how many degrees we earn, no matter how many resources we provide, no matter how much we contribute to your comfort, you will always see us as children. So thank you for freeing us from the delusion that your approval was ever the goal." Every journalist in the room knew they were witnessing history. The day power shifted without. A single shot fired. Trump tried to respond, his voice cracking, under the weight of cameras and silence. "Look, I have great respect for Africa," he said, fumbling, his hands gesturing vaguely. "Tremendous respect. Some of my—" It was a misunderstanding. "I meant that we could work together," but nobody bought it. Not this time. Not after centuries of the same excuses wrapped in new language. His words dissolved into the air like smoke, meaningless, powerless. Even his allies avoided his eyes. Some checked their watches. Others looked straight at Traore, who sat perfectly still, watching the empire crumble in slow motion. Amara Osei returned to her seat. The applause followed her like a coronation. By evening, signatures replaced speeches. In the breakout rooms and side halls, new trade routes were drafted. Africa with Asia, South America, and parts of Europe. A global alliance born out of one insult and one unbreakable response. The Burkina Faso delegation found themselves surrounded, not by aid workers with clipboards, but by ministers with proposals. Vietnam wanted to exchange agricultural technology. Cuba offered medical training partnerships. Malaysia proposed telecommunications collaboration. Indonesia discussed renewable energy. Contracts were signed. Not loans, partnerships. Not charity, trade. Not supervision, respect. Trump's delegation quietly slipped out the side exit while the real work continued. No cameras followed. They'd already found their headline. The story wasn't about insult anymore. It was about rebirth. When Traore's plane landed back in Ouagadougou, the sun was setting over the Sahel, burning gold, as if the ancestors themselves had lit the horizon. Thousands waited at the airport. No official call, no invitation. Just instinct. People wanted to see the man who turned humiliation into history. He didn't arrive like a conqueror. He stepped out quietly, saluted his people, and smiled. No medals. No speeches. Just presence. Mothers lifted their children to catch a glimpse. Old men wept openly. Young people chanted his name like a drum circle. Songs broke out without rehearsal. Traditional rhythms mixed with hip-hop beats. A sound that was ancient and brand new at once, because everyone knew this wasn't about one man. It was about all of them. Every farmer who refused to give up. Every teacher who stayed despite no pay. Every engineer who returned home instead of seeking fortune abroad. Every mother who told her children they were kings and queens when the world called them nothing. That night, from the presidential grounds, Traore spoke again. His voice carried by cell phones, radios, and the wind. He didn't mention Trump. He didn't need to. He talked about farmers cultivating drought-resistant crops, engineers designing solutions for African problems, students coding apps in local languages, doctors manufacturing vaccines in laboratories that didn't exist 5 years ago. He said, Geneva was not our victory. It was proof. Proof that Africa's rise does not need permission. Proof that we were never broken, just bent beneath weight. And now we stand straight again. And across the continent, people nodded through tears. In Lagos, Cairo, Nairobi, bars played the footage on loop. Universities analyzed his words like scripture. Artists painted murals of the moment. Even the diaspora, from Atlanta to Paris to Kingston, felt it in their bones. The insult that was meant to humiliate became the anthem of a generation. Children born that week would carry it in their names. Songs would echo it in lyrics for decades. Historians would mark it as a turning point, the day Africa stopped explaining itself and started demonstrating. History will remember that day not as the moment Africa got angry, but as the moment Africa got even, with silence, evidence, and truth. It will remember the soldier who spoke like a scholar, and the scholar who listened like a student. It will remember how the world saw Africa not as charity, but as challenge, as future. It will remember that insults have an expiration date, but dignity compounds like interest, and maybe, just maybe, the next time someone underestimates a people who've endured everything, they'll remember Geneva. They'll remember Ibrahim Traoré. They'll remember Amara Osei. They'll remember that every empire that ever forgot this rule learned it the hard way. You can occupy land. You can extract resources. You can rewrite textbooks. But you cannot kill the memory of a people who know they built civilization while you were still learning to read, because arrogance ages fast. But dignity? Dignity doesn't expire. You just witnessed the day Africa stood tall and the West had to look up. This is Traore versus America. If you felt that shift in your soul, if you believe respect should never come with conditions, drop your thoughts below. Tell me, was this the moment the balance of power finally changed? Or was it just the moment we finally had the courage to say what we always knew?